Welcome to Gwinnett County Public Library as we talk with Fran Stewart about the value of memoir writing in her personal life and your personal life. Fran Stewart is a professional author and speaker and has written the Scott Shop Mystery Series, Biscuit McKee Series, A Sleighing Song Tonight, and a nonfiction book to help aspiring writers, From the Tip of My Pen. Along with her rescue cats, she lives and writes quietly among the trees beside a creek on the other side of Hog Mountain, Georgia. Fran is always looking for inspiration and lives her life with enthusiasm, excitement, and positive expectancy. Fran, thank you for joining us today.
I'm absolutely delighted, Diane. Thank you for asking me.
You're welcome. Well, I know that you're talking to us about memoir writing today, so I wondered what did inspire you to start writing memoirs?
I need to backtrack a little bit here. I've kept journals for decades, absolute decades, but journals aren't memoirs. There's a distinction between them. So I guess I kind of started with all of my journaling, but then that wasn't quite enough. And the reason I know it's not enough is that my son, who lives in California, came for a visit. He's in his 40s. And we were talking one day, this was a couple of years ago. We were talking, and he mentioned something, and I said, "Oh, that reminds me of the story of blah, 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 blah." And he said, "Huh?" I said, "I've told you that story before." He said, "Mom, I don't remember it." Oh. And that was my first wake-up call. Because I've always shared family stories with my kids. But if they don't remember them, then what good are they? And I got to thinking about my own life. There are so many stories about my grandparents and my parents' early lives, things like that, that I know my parents shared with me when I was little, but I wasn't interested, or it didn't quite ring a bell, or, didn't hit me as being, I don't know, very important in my life at the time. But now I wish, like everything, I had those stories written down somewhere. So the next time my son came to visit, he brought me a book, big book like this, that was called something like Mom's Memories or Mom's Stories, something. And it was a whole bunch of lined pages, and there were places for pictures in there and things. And at the top of each page, it said, "Mom, tell me about, when you first knew you were pregnant with me," or "What was your favorite trip when you were a child?" Or, I mean, just lots and lots and lots of questions like that. So he said, "Mom, would you fill this out for me?" I said, "Sure." And it was kind of a coincidence, but I had already started teaching some memoirs classes through the Gwinnett County Library system. And those were going very well. I was enjoying them a whole lot. But as I started filling out this book, I realized how very many stories I had that I hadn't even thought about writing down yet. Thank goodness for all those questions. So not only was I helping other people write their stories, but I was living it myself in trying to get my own stories down there. And over the years that I've been teaching these classes, I've kept plugging away at my own memoirs and really getting somewhere with it, really enjoying it. I finally finished the book for my son, gave it to him. And before he got his hands on it, I had shared it with my grandchildren and my daughter. And they all said, "Eli doesn't get to keep this forever. We want to read it too." So it's going to circle through the family, I think. What I've found, though, is that, as I mentioned earlier, memoirs are very, very different than journal keeping. I write in my journal every single night. It's my last thing I do before I tuck in bed. And those stories, well, first of all, they might be kind of boring for somebody to read them because it's, kind of everyday stuff. But at the same time, I also put a lot of extremely personal stuff in there, figuring that nobody's going to read it until after I've croaked. And by then, they'll just deal with it the way they are. One of the questions I have people ask in the memoirs classes is, but what if I don't want to share my stories? And we deal with a lot of questions like that in these classes. Do I, where do I start? Do I want to share it? How do I know what stories to tell? The classes are an interactive set of classes where people have exercises going on, writing exercises in the class. And step by step, I work people through how to write their memoirs in the same way that I had to work through the process myself to know which stories to tell, how to tell them, and um, and I also had to come to believe that they were important. But I heard the other day that with old age comes wisdom. So I don't have wrinkles. I have oh, now I've forgotten what was the punchline. I have um, wisecrack. That was it. I have wisecracks. I'm terrible with jokes. I can never remember punchlines. It's just awful. I've had people in class laugh at me because I can't think of the joke. But anyway, and now I've forgotten where I was going. Something about I had to come to terms with my own sense of my stories really being important, and my children's interest in those stories helped me. But a lot of people don't have kids or don't have kids who are interested in their stories or not interested right now. I tell people, don't worry about it. You're not writing just for your children or even just for your grandchildren. Think about 150 years from now, researchers are going to wonder what the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century were really like for real people. If there are no written records of the life stories of people, then they won't have anything to work with. I've read some really interesting journals from people who were living through the 1918 pandemic, and those stories are particularly important for people to have access to now because it helps us realize that we're not alone, that the world has lived through things like this before and somehow or other come out on the other side of it. So 150 years from now, who knows where your memoirs might end up. I don't even know if I answered your question, Diana, but
Yes, I think that's really very interesting because I also have wondered how will history look back on this point in time and what will they say about how it was handled and what we experienced. And unless someone writes a story down, they really won't have a true knowledge of how it affected us as an individual
right.
and how it affected us as a community. But writing the story, that will give them something definite to look at. And like you say, if you look at another person in the similar situation that you are in today, it might help you understand better how your life will play out in the long run.
Yes, yes. But it's not just pandemic stories that we need to be writing now. Um, think about how much technology has changed in the last decade, certainly in the last 50 years. And my former father-in-law, well, he passed away some years ago, but he was born in 1899. And in 1969, I sat with with them in their living room and watched the first human footsteps on the moon. And so he had gone from horse and buggy days to space travel. And that change was incredible. And he used to tell stories about all these things, how he learned to drive. Of course, I didn't record them, I didn't write them down. I can't remember them. I can't remember the details now. But we have that same kind of change in our lives. Um, just the difference between, remember mimeograph machines?
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, I worked as a volunteer teacher, um, with fourth grade classes, excuse me, um, a number of years ago when I lived in Vermont, and would have to mimeograph the weekly things that I help teach the kids. What a pain in the tutu. And now we have computers and we complain about how slow they are. Excuse me? It ain't slow if you've been used to doing this sort of thing. But unless you've got that way of comparing the way it was back then with the way it is now, nobody will appreciate how far we've come. On the other hand, we have advanced so far technologically, but people are still people. Human beings still have the same drives, the same desires, the same sources of anger, the same frustrations, with little tweaks here and there, as they had 200, 300, 400 years ago. Read the diaries of some of the founding people of our country, the letters of Abigail Adams. My gosh, what that woman went through. But if she hadn't written these things down, we would have no idea that she was so much like we are, or we are so much like she was. I, I'm fascinated by people's stories.
I think that's what, as a child, some people like history, most people don't like history very much. But when you get older, you realize that, like you were just saying, that history is really people and their experiences. And if you go back and read it and it's something that you can relate to, it makes history have so much more meaning. And I had never thought going forward that perhaps our history will have so much meaning for someone else. That's a really good point to bring up because I would want going forward for people to know that we have experienced some of the same things that people did, like Abigail Adams, and people will
Mhm.
experience many, many years from now still because the human being still experiences things the same way. We have almost the same issues over and over and over in our life. We just learn better and better how to adjust, or we hope we learn better and better how to handle them and adjust to them. And possibly if we had memoirs to go back and look at, it might help us find a way that we handled them before, even just in our personal life as we go along.
Hmm. Hmm. That's true. Um, One of the things I do with my classes is I hand out a list of what I call memorable memoirs. Uh, Most of these are available through the library system. In fact, all of them are available through the library. And the just as a way of letting people find these life stories that they may relate to in a very special way. And I've had people say, yeah, but that writing is so good, that's published, that's this, that, and that. Your family won't care if your writing is not super professional. We do go over ways in the classes of how to spruce up your writing, how to make the stories a little more interesting, how to incorporate dialogue, things like that. But ultimately, it's your story told in your words, and because because it's important for people to write the way they speak in memoirs, that the reason it's important is that that way the person who's reading it, even years later, can hear you speaking. Uh, I had I had a friend, you mentioned in your intro that I've written the Biscuit McKee mystery series. There are 11 books total in the series, and I include a lot of personal memoir type stories in there. And one of the nicest compliments I ever got from one of my friends, she said, "You know, when I read those Biscuit books, I can hear you talking to me." In the fifth book, for instance, I early on in the book, it's called Indigo as an Iris. I have one of the minor characters die, and Biscuit, the librarian, Biscuit McKee, happens to be there at the time of death. She's visiting the family. If you read that, you will know precisely how my father died
Oh,
umpty years ago. My sister and I were with him. At one point, I was sitting right next to it was like a hospital bed he was in, and he looked over my shoulder. I mean, his head came up and his eyes widened like that. He couldn't, his speech wasn't real clear at that by that point, but he said, "Hello." And I knew there was a blank wall behind me, but I turned around to see if somebody was there. And somebody was there. It's just that I couldn't see her. I happened to think it was his mother, but I'm not sure about that. Obviously, I mean, it could have been an angel, it could have been whatever you want to call it. There was somebody or something there. And so in the Biscuit McKee book, Indigo as an Iris, I have that happen to Wallace, the character that is in the process of dying. And he carries on a conversation with that whoever or whatever it is. I wanted to include that life story of mine because I wanted people to know that we've sanitized death so much in this country. We've removed ourselves from it. I mean, when people died, the women of the family would prepare the body. They would wash it and they would dress it and they would lay it out and people would come to visit and all that. We don't do that nowadays. We pack them off to a mortuary or something. And so in that book, I teach people about green funerals, where the body is not embalmed, but just laid to rest in Mother Earth. We, when my mother died, 13 months after my dad did, we chose not to have her embalmed. And oh my gosh, lying there in that coffin, she was so soft. And we could pick up her hand and hold it. And she was cool because they keep the body refrigerated, cold. But we could touch her. You can't do that with an embalmed body. So I wanted to show that special connection, and I used my murder mystery to do it. I mean, there are a lot of my stories in those books, and I had great fun writing them. But then in the author note at the end, I had to say, "Oh, by the way, if you read that story, that's how my dad died." I wanted people to know that it was real. In a memoir, you don't have to say, "Oh, by the way, this is what really happened," because people know it's a memoir.
mhm.
They know these are your stories that you're writing.
Well, that's interesting, and that was going to be one of my questions: is did the memoir writing affect your fiction writing because you've written so many books, and apparently you do. And it when I read your books, it seems to me that you incorporate a lot of yourself into your stories. So it's good
Yeah.
to hear that, and I guess that would be for someone who writes a lot of memoir, that might lead them down a different path to writing more involved stories. And even if they don't publish them, it would still be a story for their family to go back and read, and just be a personal um, story. They wouldn't have to ever publish it. Just write it in a nice book. Do you write normally in a special book? You said you write every night. Uh, do you have a particular book for that?
Well, yeah, I do have for that. For years, I would just sort of pick up whatever I had handy. I've always got notepads nearby, and it was gosh, it was a mess, because nothing was in order or anything like that. And then, after a number of years of this chaos, I realized that I had to date everything I wrote so that looking back years later, I would know the time frame of it. And if I could put it all in a coherent, one page after another thing, that would help me as well as help my family coming after me reading these things. Um, I'm not going to publish my journals. Those handwritten journals are strictly for my family. But a lot of people in the classes ask, how, what about publishing? How do I need to get it published? And now it's entirely up to you. However, I do warn people, if you are famous, you have a very good chance of having your memoirs published. If you are not famous, you don't. Now, the exception to that is if you're writing a memoir, with a common thread, a common theme about some issue that a lot of people would identify with. One of my favorite books that I always recommend to the classes is Kitchen Table Wisdom by Naomi Rachel Naomi Remen. She's a medical doctor who counsels terminal cancer patients.
Mhm.
And so she has a lot of stories through this book, but the main thread of it is not, oh, I'm going to tell all these stories about all these poor people who have cancer. It's not like that. It's a very uplifting book because she learns from every one of these patients of hers. And so the book is about the lessons that they've taught her. That's what lifts it out of just the ordinary memoir into a book that's truly memorable. Um, I When people take my classes, I don't ask them to come in thinking that they're going to get their books published. If they want to publish them, I don't spend a lot of time in class talking about that, but self-publishing is always a good idea nowadays. That's how you can get your book out there. And I talk a little bit about that, but if people are interested. But that's not the focus of these classes I teach. What I want is to jumpstart people so that they begin to realize that their life stories are important, and B, actually get them to put their butt in a seat and start writing. Because the difference between somebody who has written their life story and somebody who hasn't is just that the person who's written it has actually done the work, has sat down and started doing it. And it doesn't matter whether you do it, on a keyboard, whether you handwrite it with pen or pencil, whether you use lined yellow legal pads or a fancy, you know, blank page type book. All of that is that's just the extraneous stuff. The important thing is writing the stories.
That makes sense if you think about it, because if you're just telling the story for your family or for your own enjoyment, because sometimes just writing a story for yourself, you remember lots of it that you haven't remembered in a long time, and so that's worth a lot also to people, just to go back and think about times in their life that were so important to them. Because sometimes we get so busy, I think, in the world that we forget a lot of the good stuff that's happened.
Yeah.
So memoir writing would help in that too.
It also helps when we hit a rough spot in our life, we can look back at those other rough spots that we've written about. And we can say, okay, I took one step at a time and I got through that. So I can take one step at a time and I can get through this. When you put this sense of perspective on your own life, it's really like a self-growth journey, writing memoirs. The A lot of times people start out with just the superficial stories, the funny birthday parties, the time my Irish setter ate half my birthday cake. Oh, that was a big one for me. But ultimately now, I mean, at the time it was, "Ah!" But now it's a funny, great story to have written down. And those kind of stories are important.
Mhm.
But when you can delve deeper, as I encourage people to do in the classes, then you get the real value of the writing. I told people the last class I taught, I told people that the what you write today may turn out to be a survival guide for somebody in the future, or a roadmap to what to do or what not to do. And if you're not willing to put yourself out there and write these stories, then you are no help whatsoever to the upcoming generations. I shouldn't say no help whatsoever, but you know what I mean. Your stories won't last unless they're written down.
Well, that's true. They do get forgotten and then they get confused and people don't want to repeat them because they don't remember exactly how it was. So I can
Yeah.
see how having it written would be so much more beneficial to people. It really would. So I'm really looking forward to the programs that you're going to do for the library when you're going to explain more about how to write memoirs and
Mhm.
the value of it and help people um, as they go through this journey because I think sometimes people just get stuck or they write something down and they don't know how to continue or how to go forward. And by having a series of classes, it will help them to write a little bit every week so that they know they have to come
Right.
back with a little bit more written and might be just jump starting them into being a memoir writer.
Absolutely. And I generally do the classes, a group of 6 classes, just, one week right after the next. And I give assignments at the end of each one. They're always optional, but I've never had the whole class refuse to do any of these. I mean, people really get caught up in it and really seem to enjoy it. And that feeds my sense of being worthwhile. I want to make a difference in people's lives. And I think I do through these classes. It may not be a huge contribution that I'm making, but it's enough.
Mhm.
It keeps me fueled and it helps other people get their gas going too. So
And
that's good.
and I think that's what we all want to do is to be a help for other people, and there's so many different ways to do it. We all have a different something to
Mhm.
offer. Everybody doesn't offer the same thing to everyone. So
Right.
I know that also we talked a little earlier, you were talking about you're going to have a new website soon. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yes. It actually came about because of a memoirs class I was teaching. This woman took my class and got a great deal out of it and all of that stuff. And in the course of the 6 weeks, she mentioned that she was a website developer. And I sort of tucked that away. And oh my gosh, I have dealt with, I don't know, 5 different websites over the past decade, and they've all been really frustrating for me because I didn't know what to do with them. They weren't set up exactly the way I wanted, but I didn't know how to do it. Blah, 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 blah. Here I am whining about it. But finally, I contacted her and I said, Melanie, I need help. So, so she has designed an incredible website for me. And my previous websites have focused on my mystery writing for the most part. But that was one box in my life where, I did my mystery writing, and now I'm more focused on the memoirs teaching. And so that's what this website is going to focus on. There are lists of upcoming classes, how to sign up for them, you know, some intro material about memoirs, things like that. But should be very flexible and very much fun for people. So
Good. That gives us something to look forward to and to check out later for so we can see what you're doing and where you're doing your classes and things like that. So that
yeah,
will be
and
very.
I should say it's franstewart.com.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I appreciate you telling us that. Okay, is there anything else that you want to talk about before we close today? Because I know I don't want to steal all of your secrets in one talk. So I know that the library will be having some classes that you're going to be doing for us, and we look forward to those.
Mhm.
And to your new website. And what else is there we'd like to see here?
I want to stress one thing, Diane. I think it's very important. I am very careful in the classes I teach to make sure that they are non judgmental, that they are safe. The ones that I teach online, I never, ever record
Mhm.
because when things are recorded, they go out into the world and then you have no control over who shares them, who snips pieces out of them, you know, anything like that. So, and the classes that I teach in the libraries, the in-person classes are the same way. I want people to feel not just that they're learning something, but that they're safe doing it,
Mhm.
so that they can feel comfortable sharing some of the deeper issues of their lives. And believe me, people do get into sharing those. Sharing is always optional. They don't have to they don't have to say a thing in class if they don't want to. But um but I want them, if they want to share, I want them to feel comfortable doing it.
That's really
So
good to hear.
that's
That's
my
really
main message.
well. That's very nice to hear, and I appreciate you doing this for the library today. Thank you very much, and we'll have this out on our website soon that people can see it and learn more about your classes going forward. Thank you, Fran.
Great. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate it.